Pittsburgh, San Francisco, Fort Worth. One of Fort Worth's most iconic buildings, they say. Oh, sweet naive Fort Worth, I was once like you. Okay, now if your city is like mine, you probably also have some sort of trashy alternative newspaper they distribute for free in beat up tin boxes located at every downtown street corner. And inside of the paper, alongside endless escort ads, which you will think reflects very poorly on the publication, you will inevitably find the sex advice column of beloved local writer Dan Savage. It took me many years before I learned that Dan Savage is not in fact from Vancouver at all, but rather Seattle, and that his famous column is simply syndicated in more than 50 different alternative newspapers across the US and Canada, many readers of which probably think he is from their city too. Mass market syndication is one of the sneakiest ways of keeping the monoculture alive, and it tends to provoke a lot of public irritation whenever it is discovered. But the fact is, it costs a lot of money to put out a newspaper or a TV show or a radio broadcast, and even big media companies in big cities rarely have the budget to hire as many reporters and writers and editors as it would take to consistently churn out the high-quality tent. Tent is what cool people call content now, just FYI. So as a result, a lot of what you hear and read and watch from local media outlets is very often just a patchwork of tent harvested from large media syndicates who sell pre-made and relatively generic news reports, newspaper columns, and radio shows to local distributors at a much cheaper price than it would cost to produce such things from scratch using local talent. For example, you may have seen this viral clip from the Conan O'Brien show a few years back, where he made a little montage of a bunch of local news anchors all saying the exact same thing.
Who are you really shopping for this holiday season? It's okay, you can admit it if you've bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
Well, it's okay, you can admit it if you have bought an item or 2 or maybe 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it. You've bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it if you bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
It's okay, you can admit it if you bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
This seems kind of creepy, but all they're doing is reading the script of some news report their station would have purchased from one of the big American news syndicates, like the Associated Press. Usually what happens in these sorts of cases is that the majority of the report is filmed and narrated by employees of the syndicate, meaning that all the local anchors have to do is read a little intro and then cut to the tape. This is sometimes called a rip and read story, and it's how even a small town TV station can somehow manage to report on the war in Ukraine every night. Now, the example that I think tends to weird out people even more is syndicated radio stations like Kiss FM. Kiss FM is a brand run by the enormous iHeartMedia radio conglomerate and is broadcast in over 30 cities across this continent. They play top 40s type music interspliced with random DJ banter and call-in games and stuff. Every version of Kiss FM is a little bit different, but not by much.
Chicago's #1 hit music station. 103.5 Kiss FM 98.5 Kiss FM 102.7 Kiss FM.
And much like the local news stations, a lot of what you hear on Kiss FM wasn't actually recorded in your city, even though it might come off that way. Those wacky morning DJs you love so much might actually be a show that they're just piping in from Chicago or LA or something, with the hosts carefully trained to avoid making references to anything too regionally specific. This is why they tend to play a lot of games to fill the time, or by bantering about very generic news releases, you know, like, "Hey Kelly, did you know that the Marriageological Institute says that 78% of wives say they would give up sex if it meant they never had to empty the dishwasher?" Syndicated radio shows do have tricks to fool the audiences into thinking that the show is more local than it actually is, of course. They can get the host to record a special promotional bumper for one specific city and then play that during breaks between the shows to create the illusion that the host is from there. You know, these bits where the host is like, "Hey, I'm Wacky Timothy, and you're listening to Vancouver's best blend of the 80s, 90s, and beyond." Or they can do tricks where they're like, "And now it's time for the traffic," and then they cut to somebody who actually is in the city, and so on. Sneaky stuff. By the way, talking of radio, have you ever heard those annoying ads for Shane Diamonds or Spence Diamonds in Canada? I used to think that Vancouver was the only city that had an obnoxious diamond company company that felt the need to advertise themselves during every single commercial break on the radio. But no, it turns out that these are actually just giant corporations that exist in pretty much every North American city and have apparently just decided to spend their entire advertising budget on radio commercials. Another annoying ad campaign I'm sure you've seen is the Shen Yun dance troupe. These guys will of course be no great mystery to longtime viewers of this channel. Shen Yun is a traveling dance company run by a mostly Chinese-American cult known as the Falun Gong, based out of New York. I've done a couple videos about the cult's rather extensive propaganda empire that I'm quite proud of and you should really check out. But anyway, while I think that awareness of this is starting to increase, for a long time I know that many people were inclined to believe that Shen Yun was just some unique thing in their city, likely some sort of reflection of their active and robust Chinese community. But no, because this is primarily a cult propaganda initiative, it is actually the same roving group of people traveling to almost every major city in North America, and increasingly most other major cities are in the world as well. And I know this because you guys are always sending me Shen Yun poster sightings in the weirdest of places. But in fairness to Shen Yun, I find it is rather common for city folk to forget that traveling entertainers are a thing. This is particularly the case when it comes to stuff like folk music festivals or jazz festivals or so-called fringe festivals of small-scale theater performances. I think this is even the case with food things like barbecue festivals and stuff. I mean, in theory, all a city has to do to put on a successful festival is convince a lot of big shots to come over and entertain their people, which isn't really that hard to do if you pay them enough. But I have found that people often tend to suffer from the flattering delusion that because their city has a big folk festival or whatever, this somehow reflects their unique deep commitment to the performing arts. I think the same is true for the various outdoor Shakespeare festivals that so many cities have and often imagine reflect so well on their commitment to classic theater, even though many of these performances will also be put on by touring troupes of out-of-town actors. Okay, so when I asked my Twitter followers what were their top picks for things that people tend to think are exclusive to their city, but really aren't, two nominees in particular proved to be the overwhelming favorites: weather and traffic. When it comes to weather, almost everyone on this continent tends to believe that they live in some uniquely special climate region. I don't know what the platonic ideal of normal weather most people carry around in their heads is, but it seems like a lot of people take it for granted that in an ordinary city, the weather will barely change at all or something. Thus, in almost every city that fails to meet this impossible standard, you get people running around like, "Oh my god, 1 minute it's sunny and the next it's raining. What cruel and cursed land is this?" Or, as many of you noted, in almost every city, everybody likes to crack the exact same joke. Well, you know what they say about, if you don't like the weather, just wait a few minutes. I feel like a lot of cities also seem to suffer from a similar fantasy that somewhere out there in normal world, the people get to enjoy 4 distinct seasons, whereas in our uniquely horrible hellscape of a city, all of the seasons blend together in some monstrous way, which leads to another very common joke that some of you noted. Well, you know what they say about, we only got 2 seasons, winter and construction. Constant inconvenient street construction is of course another thing that people tend to believe is a unique horror that only citizens of their beleaguered burg have to endure. I have now, for instance, been to multiple cities where their souvenir shops sell goofy little trinkets of like construction pylons because they believe that incessant annoying road construction is their unique and special quirk that contributes to their supposedly uniquely bad traffic. Along with construction, uniquely bad traffic also tends to be blamed on supposedly uniquely bad drivers, who are often assumed to be uniquely ignorant of some very basic rule of the road. As my friend Nakri Sisa puts it, the complaint I always hear is, drivers here don't know how to merge. My friend Anna likewise regurgitated this tired joke. Our drivers don't make full stops at stop signs, and we refer to it as the roll or stop. A slight variation on this one is the idea that it is actually the residents of one community over who are the uniquely bad drivers, and thus all of the city's traffic problems should be appropriately blamed on them. This may be bound up in racial stereotypes of the other community, or it may simply reflect a generalized big city snobbishness of the perceived cultural inferiority of a smaller nearby residential area, which is probably part of the hated suburbs. The idea that the integrity of your city's identity is being corrupted by the lesser suburbanites is a very common trope as well. Like, I mean, we all know that the people that come from the suburbs are just a bunch of wannabes who claim to be from, but really aren't. Only people who are born and raised in the throbbing heart of